Okay, that was a great film. I pride myself on knowing a lot about Tuskegee Airmen, but I learned a lot that I didn't even know. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Branden.
Good evening.
Hi.
Hi there.
So once again, if you all didn't hear me, that was a great film.
Good to see you, Branden.
Yeah, that was a great film, and I pride myself on knowing a lot about Tuskegee Airmen. But that really taught me a lot that I didn't know, especially having two of the last surviving members, being from my hometown of Detroit. So I want to, thank Jesse for doing the film, and of course, thanking Lieutenant Alexander Jefferson and Colonel Harry Stewart for serving our country.
Thank you.
Thank you. So first, I want to start with Jesse. I want to ask you a question. What made you want to document the Tuskegee Airmen?
I mean, who doesn't want to document the Tuskegee Airmen? But I've got to tip my hat off to Ford and the Ford Motor Company Fund, because this whole thing was their idea, and this movie doesn't exist without their resources, their funding, and their confidence in the project. And specifically, Pamela Alexander is going to join us here on screen shortly. But the Ford Fund wanted to do something about the Tuskegee Airmen. They were sponsoring the exhibit that was moving over to the Charles Wright that Dr. Brian Smith over here oversees, and the whole museum there. And they called me up and said, hey, we want to do something about the Tuskegee Airmen, but we don't know what exactly, what kind of film to do. And we got together and brainstormed this film that you saw that, essentially we all agreed, rather than try to tell the whole story of the Tuskegee Airmen, which would take a mini series to do, as everybody here knows, let's instead tell the stories from the lives of two of those airmen who we have right here in our backyard, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Jefferson and Lieutenant Colonel Harry Stewart, who has been living in Detroit their entire lives and have these incredible stories that not a lot of people know. And once we realized that we didn't have to worry about telling the entire Tuskegee Airmen story, we basically made the film, as intimate as we could, almost like you're sitting on your grandfather's lap and he's telling you these war stories. That was the style we wanted to project onto the screen and really get audiences to know these two men in a way you might not have before.
Mm-hmm. How much did you know about the Tuskegee Airmen before this film?
Man, I mean, a little bit. I'm a history buff, and I like World War II history, especially. I've never met an airman before, and that was my favorite part of making this film, was having the opportunity to sit all day with these two men and listen to their stories. And we did about 3 hours of interview for each airman. I think you guys remember that. It was a pretty long day on a very, very hot day in a very, very hot hangar. And these, forgetting, but these two spent their lives sitting in hot cockpits. So the hangar was pretty cool compared to what they went through. But I was sweating bullets. And it was an utter joy. The time went by so fast talking to these guys. And the hardest part for me was trying to figure out in the editing room, how do you make a 50-minute movie out of 6 hours of the most compelling stories you'll ever hear.
Mm-hmm. You did a pretty good job of cutting.
You gave me great material.
Yes, very nice.
Lieutenant Colonel Jefferson, what did you think of the film?
I thought it was pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
If we had almost like an outline. See, anytime you ask someone about a question and you had to talk about it out of the top of your head, it takes time to hesitate. And many times going through that, we had to, and by the time your mind, see, we're not 20 years old today.
Mhm.
When you're 20 or 21, you can think about ideas and come to your mind and you get rid of it. Boom, 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 just like that. But hell, we're 90 plus. And when you say, how did you feel? We had to stop and think about it. Yeah, I guess so. And by the time we said it, time moves by and the film is going through. And sometimes we were just a little long in giving an answer, just like right now.
Mhm.
Well, for the
But-
record, you guys are still sharper than most 20-year-olds I know, or 30-year-olds.
Oh, God.
Lieutenant Colonel Stewart, what were your thoughts on the film?
Well, I was certainly proud to tell my story, but I think of all of the Tuskegee Airmen that that we've left behind because of their demise. A lot of people don't know that
Yes.
there were probably 16,000 what we call Tuskegee Airmen, and these people were not just pilots; they were mechanics, they were doctors, they were
With
drivers,
all the support.
all sorts
Yes.
of things to support the pilots who were going to go overseas. And of that 16,000 that did that, those that went overseas, there were about 360 pilots,
Yeah.
or 350 pilots that went overseas. So when you talk about the story that Jeff and I are telling, is that there are 16,000 stories in there. All of them are just ripping with fascination. And all these stories probably will never be told and that type of thing. But we're just two of the 16,000 there, or of the pilots, the combat pilots that went overseas, two of the 350. But it was well done, Jesse. I really enjoyed looking at it. This is my third time, I guess, of seeing the film there. And it brought
Well,
back.
coming from you, that's the highest compliment I can get.
Well done. Well done.
Right.
Lieutenant Colonel Jefferson, how did white pilots and bombers react to the Tuskegee Airmen escorting on bombing missions? How did they react to you all?
When they finally found out who we were, see, by the time I was a POW, they escorted by red tails. Well, they knew red tails. As soon as I said red tails, everybody in the camp knew it because the word had spread. There's a group called Red Tails, and these are the guys who would make sure you got home to the bombers. And the reputation, it spread.
Lieutenant Colonel Stewart, what were some of the challenges that you faced going through the training camp portion of becoming a Tuskegee Airman?
Well, I guess all the way through is what any African American black man faces, and that's proving himself.
Mhm.
And for these original thoughts that people had, that we wouldn't make it, that we didn't have the capabilities, either mentally or physically, of mastering flight. And it was every stage that we went through, we just had to prove ourselves and prove that, yes, we were equal to anyone else in doing this, and proving that we could go ahead and do as good as anyone else.
Physically, to me, it's getting through physically. Hell, I was only 120 pounds. And those long, I can just think about it now, 5.5, 6 hours of escorting, sitting in that cockpit. Oh, I got to the place where I turned this way, I turned that way, trying to make it even.
Dr.
Yeah.
Dr. Brian Smith, you're the president of the National Tuskegee Airmen Museum in Detroit. How cool was it to have the film filmed in the hangar in Detroit?
Very cool. I enjoyed the day spent in the hot hangar, making sure these gentlemen were able to tell their story and that it would be spread throughout the country with the good financing of the Ford Motor Company Fund.
Yeah, so sometimes I think about Brian. Brian, where did we meet? Way back when you were a teenager.
That was in a hobby shop in Detroit. on the west side of Detroit.
Wyoming.
And I started asking him, well, why was he interested in a P-51? I had an inkling that might be a Tuskegee Airman. My dad told me about them when I was 12. And sure enough, it was Alexander Jefferson who invited me to his home. He's the first Tuskegee Airman I've met. And that was a long time ago.
Long time ago.
We talked about Colonel Stewart, how he helped the students fly planes. And Dr. Smith, what all do you do at the museum as far as students go?
So you probably see behind me rockets. We're actually trying to get African-American young people into aerospace science because we know if things get back to normal, we'll start heading toward Mars sometime soon. We're also teaching students how to fly. Before COVID-19 hit, we were in need of like 8,000 pilots in the airline industry. That was just for Delta Airlines alone. We have a class here where we're teaching young people as well as older people how to fly. The young people do it for free and the older people pay, and that helps offset the cost for the young people. We're trying to continue the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen by getting young people interested in aviation and aerospace science. Believe it or not, there are fewer African-American pilots today than there were in World War II.
We've been doing this for a long time.
Speaking of keeping that legacy alive, Dr. Thornton, why is that important to keep the legacy alive and to let younger people, even my age and younger, to know about what the Tuskegee Airmen did?
Well, as you saw in the film, there's so much to be told. The two young men, and I call them both young men, both lieutenant colonels, every conversation that you have with them, you find out more information about what they went through. Well, we used to have griots and people that told the stories. So how do we keep the legacy alive? Well, we tell the story. It's up to us to make sure that we talk to them and they with us go out in the community and tell the story. The film did an excellent job of showing who these young folks are. As Colonel Stewart said, there are only 10 combat pilots alive. How fortunate are we here in Detroit with two of those pilots that can go out and talk to people and share that information? The programs that Brian is talking about are at City Airport. Been in a battle to keep it open, but it is open. There are more than 4 gliders. There are more than rocketry programs. There are all kinds of flying programs and things that we do to have kids come out and understand aerospace and aviation. What makes me proud is people like you and people like Jesse that are saying, okay, we're going to join with you and keep this alive. So for me, I have a good relationship with them, and we call these two granddads, and that's the way the kids perceive it. For example, you indicated somebody can sit down, it's like sitting on their lap and talking to them. You should see them when they talk to the audience. And we try and learn from them, glean from them, so that we can carry on that legacy.
We also have
Somebody's got to do it. Somebody's got to do it.
Right. We also have Pamela Alexander as a panelist. She's director of community development with the Ford Motor Company Fund and the executive producer of the film.
Oh, yes.
Well, I give that credit to Ford Motor Company and Ford Fund because that's where the funding came from for the film. We're major sponsors and have been partners with the Tuskegee Airmen National Museum here for a long, long time. Yeah. And because of the educational programs that Brian spoke about, and it's very importantly, I've been to so many of their events, and we had to find a way to tell the story of the airmen and of these two gentlemen who we are just so lucky to have here in Michigan. I mean, we all owe them so much. And Ford, we're about legacy. We're about celebrating achievement. I mean, what better representatives can there be to that in our country, in any community, African-American or any other group, than these two gentlemen that this film was about today. So we were just really excited to provide the funding and to thank you to Jesse for his vision of putting it together into the amazing film that you saw tonight.
Pamela, why have the Ford Motor Company Fund been so adamant about telling the history of the
Well, when you're 100 plus, 110 or so, we're a pretty old company ourselves. But legacy is important to us. It's important to recognize. It's important to honor. We've done another film on Judge Damon Keith that came out prior to this one, who was another Detroit treasure. It's who we are, and it's who makes us who we are. And I don't think any of us, Brian or myself or yourself, are sitting in these positions right now on a podcast without the efforts of these gentlemen that this movie is about. We truly stand on their shoulders. So at Ford, it's really important for people to know that history, for people to see this and see the human beings, not just the entity that is the Tuskegee Airmen, but the individuals. We have a long history. When they received the Congressional Gold Medal of Honor, we sponsored and we funded the reception in their honor on the Capitol. So we are truly indebted to these individuals, and Ford is just really excited to be a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I am really indebted. Here at the Detroit City Airport, we have an airplane, a North American T-6 that both Harry Stewart and Alexander Jefferson flew as instructors when they came back from combat.
That's right.
I fly that airplane today, and it's such a privilege to do that. So I'm grateful for what they've done. They're my heroes.
Definitely.
We got a T6 and a Stearman.
Yes.
That's right.
And they all have Tuskegee history.
Mm-hmm.
Colonel Stewart, for someone who's flown dozens of missions overseas during World War II, only to come back home and not be able to get a job as a pilot, how does that make you feel?
Well, I tried, and I tried as becoming a pilot in the Air Corps, and I succeeded. However, when I got out of the service, a lot of prejudice still reigned at that time there, and unfortunately, I ran out of time. My age started going before long. I was not old enough to qualify as far as age was concerned to fly. So I decided to go back to school, and I got my degree from New York University in mechanical engineering, and I went up that line after the war there. So I'm also proud of that, just as proud of the degree that I got in going back to college there as I am of getting my wings.
Right. Colonel Jefferson, you said you were a teacher here in Detroit. What did your students think about your life as a Tuskegee Airman?
When I came back, I tried once or twice to get into commercial flying, but after being rebuffed, I said, "To heck with it. I'm old enough to quit anyway." And I decided to literally start the museum. See, the first chapter of Tuskegee Airmen was started in my basement of my house. With we organized as the first chapter in my house, and the museum came out of that meeting. Ordale Polk, General Theus. I think of the men who put out years and years and hours in the first museum. Because the first museum was a product of the Detroit chapter. We had enough men in the chapter to put a man in the museum every day in the week. The museum was a product of the Detroit chapter. God, I think about it now. The men had volunteered to start the chapter at historic Fort Wayne. My gosh. And by that time, I'm old enough to say to heck with it. I'm tired of flying anyway. And I just quit and put all my time in the chapter. That's when anybody said, "We need a speaker." I volunteered like a dummy. The old saying, "You're not supposed to volunteer," but the hell, I volunteered. Somebody said, "We've got a speaker." "Okay, Jeff, he'll be at this school or this church." And all during the years, between Jim Edwards, Bill Thompson, Wardell Polk, golly, I think of the men who gave their time all the way.
Colonel Stewart, we have a question about the Top Gun competition. Were you the first winner?
Yes, we had three of us who competed in the Top Gun as the Tuskegee Airmen.
Mm-hmm.
12 fighter groups in the country at the time there, and 3 pilots were selected from each of those groups to enter the Top Gun contest there. And it was a team of 3. And that first Top Gun contest, which took place in May, in fact, it was May 2nd to May 12th of 1949. It was won by the Tuskegee Airmen and not Tom Hanks.
Exactly. It's a very important point.
Dr. Smith, we talk about the National Museum here. A lot of people, if you may not know about it, how can they visit and what can they see there?
Sure. As soon as the pandemic is calmed down, we'll announce a grand opening of the new exhibit at the Charles H. Wright. And for young people who are interested, think they're interested in learning to fly, we'll do Young Eagle rallies where we take students or people from Detroit, young people from Detroit flying. It's free of charge. Take them on a flight around the city. And that's what Harry Stewart was referring to when he was flying that young person. We do that every month, April through October. And our ground school starts in October also. You should be able to get your pilot license. If we hadn't had the COVID-19 stay-at-home restrictions, we would be giving students pilot lessons right now.
Okay.
And that's students from 8 years old to 17. That's the free component.
For the free airplane rides.
Yes.
You can see that on our website. It's TuskegeeMuseum.org.
TuskegeeMuseum.org. All right.
Dr. Thornton, do we know how many Detroiters became trained to be Tuskegee Airmen?
An exact figure I couldn't tell you because, like with Lieutenant Colonel Stewart, he was from New York.
Got you.
You know, Detroit was a mecca after the war because it was easier to access jobs and there was more opportunities for African Americans or colored folks, as we would call them.
Mm-hmm.
So the exact number I couldn't tell you. The number that are involved in the chapter, so let me back up. They were known as red tails until the mid-50s.
Right.
And when the first time the word Tuskegee Airmen was coined. And then as Lieutenant Colonel Jefferson said, in their basement, they organized this organization called Tuskegee Airmen International. Okay? So the membership in the Detroit area is somewhere probably about 150 to 200 men and women. Because as we get older, the pool of aviators and everything has declined since 1949. I don't know if you picked up on that. We don't have as many African American pilots flying for the airplanes and everything as we did in 1949. It's declining. So that's why we're trying to bring more African Americans and minorities into aerospace, avionics, and flying. Thus, the programs that Brian is talking about, the EAA program is an excellent introduction. We're also involved with Civil Air Patrol in some respect, because that was not open to a whole lot of people of color 20, 30 years ago. So we keep telling the story. One thing I forgot to say, the French government 3.5 years ago recognized Alexander Jefferson
Sure did.
there, and they sent a commissary person over, and they awarded him the Legion of Honor Merit, established by Napoleon Bonaparte in 1802.
That's great.
We had met Bombardier that same year that had been in a B-29, if I remember that right, Ray Popovich, and he had always wanted to meet the Tuskegee Airmen. So we brought him to a dinner,
That was.
5th anniversary,
Yeah.
and these little guys, the little white one, the little black one, hugged for about 10 minutes, and there wasn't a dry eye in the place.
Mm-hmm.
Since then, we have been in contact with that family constantly.
That's it. What a life.
And I'd like to.
Oh, go ahead, Dr. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Harry Stewart was rejected by, I think it was TWA and Pan Am. And the Legacy Airlines, it was the idea of my late wife, Tammy, to have them award him honorary captain status. And the first one to do it was Delta Airlines. They flew him down to Atlanta and gave him his hat, his wings. And when he got back to the airport on the way home, Delta pilots were looking at him with great respect because he had those honorary wings on.
Those
American Airlines followed with a similar honor for all of the airmen still remaining with us.
And every time we fly, I'm always in my jacket with those wings. And you'd be surprised. Once you start to foot in and the pilot or the co-pilot see you come through with those wings, all of a sudden it's Colonel. Find out who you are and announce the rest of the crew. Those wings, they count. Just like they did the day you graduated down at Tuskegee. To respect those wings.
And it's really great
Oh, go ahead,
out of no pilots in 1950 there, and going along the sons and daughters and the grandsons and granddaughters of those less than pilots that got their wings in World War II. You find them in every airline today, and every airline. And one of the most surprising things that I saw was that there was a Delta flight. I guess it was about 3 years ago, that was flying from the Atlanta airport to somewhere out west there. But the crew on that plane there, they had two black pilots in the cockpit. And what was amazing about the thing is both of them were women.
Women. That's
Yes.
right. Two black women in Delta.
Yep.
Things have moved. Slowly but surely. Things have moved.
We want to bring Jesse back in to talk about some readings on the Tuskegee Airmen.
Yes, as everybody's homework to follow up on these stories. Both these men have incredible memoirs out that are, I got a lot of my research from myself, and the stories we told on screen today are just a fraction of what these guys have to offer. And so I really, really encourage everybody here to go on Amazon, and you guys correct me if there's anywhere else you can find these books, but Red Tail Captured, Red Tail Freed by Colonel Jefferson, and Soaring to Glory by Colonel Stewart are just beautifully written memoirs that I really encourage everybody to go out and read.
I would encourage also, in fact, if you go to the museum website, we'll make sure that Harry Stewart can sign the book for you.
The author,
There it is.
Philip Hamilton, who is a accomplished writer for Aviation magazine. So the name of the book is Soaring to Glory, and the author is Philip Hamilton, a noted aviation writer.
I just want to point out that these guys, they've been doing this for a while and telling these stories for a while, but it's another thing to be able to tell these stories with 3 different cameras trained on them and a crew of, 15, 20 people in the room, and to be this honest and this open with myself and the crew, and by default, everybody who's watching this film. I can't imagine how hard a thing that is, especially when talking about something as sensitive as this. I'm just grateful to the 2 of you for opening up the way that you did. Of course, the Forward Motor Company Fund for making this whole thing happen to begin with, and to the Freep Film Festival for showcasing it. But especially you 2. I couldn't do anything you guys have done in your lifetime. So thank you.
Jesse, Alexander Jefferson is holding up his book, Red Tail Captured, Red Tail Free. And they can order it directly from him by going to alexanderjeffersonredtail.com. and they will mail it out within 2 days. Did you get that?
Yeah, and then it are all of Alexander Jefferson's illustrations as well. We use some of them in the film, but there's even more in the book. So it's not just a book of words; it's a book of images, and it's beautiful. It's where I got so many of my questions for Colonel Jefferson, and the same with Colonel Stewart. His book just came out last year. It's hot off the presses, and it's just great. You know, it's where you can go over the whole story.
Both books will be autographed.
Once again, we want to thank Jesse and Pamela for help making this film possible. Dr. Brian Smith and Dr. Thornton for their expertise on the Tuskegee Airmen, and of course, Lieutenant Colonel Jefferson and Lieutenant Colonel Stewart for serving our country and being history as Tuskegee Airmen. Thank you.
There's an old saying, somebody's got to do it.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to do it. Rise to the occasion. Failure is not an option. That's Colonel Davis. Failure is not an option.
Thank you, gentlemen.